Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Value of Everything. Now, we have a slightly different, interesting review. I'd like to start to branch out a little bit here. Now, two very famous books about, or famous authors and books about our oppression would be Brave New World by Aldous Huxley and George Orwell's 1984. Very interesting writers. One thing I'd like to obviously pick on, just in comparison to today and in their time, these guys came out around, I think most of these books came out in the 1930s, and I guess it is a time of where we had the Roaring Twenties, and we're getting very disenchanted by humanity and where it's turning to, and the ills of mass production and mechanized warfare, and lots of incredible things which are happening. And it's kind of uncanny if I keep on picking on that 1930s era to today's era. There's a lot of coincidences which are occurring, and it's interesting how we should speak about these two people. Obviously, these guys are incredible writers and intellectuals. They're quite interestingly as well, they're very keen on eugenics. Now, they're probably taking a bit of a perspective of Plato's Philosopher King's view, which basically is the use of force, which I wouldn't agree with, where they will use force to achieve the best means for humanity, which is not quite that agreeable. But yeah, it's very interesting how these guys perceived certain ways and manners, how society could be shaped at, and obviously highlights some incredible ills which could occur in the future. And I think if you read both books, I think they've got sort of both angles covered. With Aldous Huxley, you've got really the gentle, easy, instant gratification, joyful walk into Neverland, but is actually a horror movie. Whereas George Orwell's got more of the physical appearance of government oppression, and it's very vivid, and you can see it in a very, obviously you can read it in a literal sense, and it's obviously the use of force, which particularly could appear at a state of the last moment once Brave New World comes to the end. You've got potentially the 1984, which could take over after that point. So it's interesting in those perspectives, and I guess you would say, in some ways, you could say that you could make another little theory here in terms of like where you'd have a government which is more advanced, they would go the Aldous Huxley way, and where you have a government which is less advanced, say your North Korea's, they would go more so down the route of 1984. George Orwell. Now, let's just do just some very simple book comparisons, and I'm just going to delve into ideas of what's society's looking at right now. It's very interesting how these guys were really looking at this stuff, and obviously they didn't have any idea what potentially could happen down the road, and these predictions did manifest for themselves before their eyes in a lot of ways. So it is incredible how these predictions have occurred. I am always fascinated with philosophy and predictions, and obviously we look at history at the same time to make these predictions. And obviously, when we look at this, we can determine things that and future states which can happen to the world. We can make better decisions on the way that we control our lives. So there is an important lesson to be learnt from both of these sides. And even though I could always keep on talking about how beautiful the world's going to be and how all this technology is going to be amazing for us, there is obviously a very important aspect to look at is where things can go rapidly wrong. And let's go so far to the extent of humanity's Extinction? Distinction? I can't say the word. Basically where we get wiped out. So let's delve in a little bit. Orwell obviously had the theory that there would be a certain amount of censorship which would be occurring, and censorship in the Western world does occur to a certain extent. There is the royal family in Britain, where there's news articles which go out internationally. There is suppression of that data internally. When America went to war, and I believe I can't remember who it was, but very high people of the UN, Kofi Annan, potentially, stated that so the war with Iraq was illegal. That was banned from the press. So there is certain levels of censorship that do occur in the Western world. Probably key pieces of information which are quite vital when governments want to perform certain acts. So we do have censorship which does occur. However, we did, or maybe you could say, oh, maybe the government and the military put together the internet. So we do have this blossoming of ridiculous amounts of information. At the same time, I am talking to you and telling you about these things which potentially would have been censored. So it hasn't quite manifested in this way. We're not really controlled and suppressed as what it would seem in a censorship form, like in North Korea, or particularly China as well. They don't like Google as much. Google's not the #1 search engine. It's more of a search engine which is controlled by the government, so you cannot see certain political views. Tiananmen Square, I think. Potentially might have just been butchering that word, where the man who is holding the shopping bag in front of the tank. You won't see that image anytime soon if you're in China. Maybe you probably find ways around it if you can hack it a little bit, but it is there is suppression which does occur. Depends on the circumstance of where the government is. Just think of that. There potentially is more thoughts that I could apply to that of our own censorship, which we're not quite really viewing ourselves. But I think the interesting perspective is when we go down what Huxley will say, and Huxley was more of the fear that there would be really no reason for a ban on books in the first place, because who's going to read anyway? Which is really sad. And if you were really connecting the dots, you would say, this is really resonating as true more. People are very transfixed on instant gratification. They like to play Candy Crush and check what other people are doing on Facebook, reading about what their football team transfers are or the results. There is a ridiculous amount of distractions out there which really doesn't give us any type of really curiosity which occurs. Maybe we're curious about what's happening in the realm of sport and the realm of celebrity, but we're not really curious in terms of what is going on in the world and governments and politics. Something that I was fairly interested in. I guess there's just a little bit of a you'd like to just dig a little bit deep into a subject, which is, I think, from my stance, I dug a little bit into the world of economics through purchasing housing, and then dug a little bit deeper, and then started to go down the route of conspiracy theory and slightly mysticism. But once I got there a little bit further, I started to approach things with a little bit more philosophy, understanding a little bit more about the world. And then the curiosity is like the banks of the river has burst, and literally I cannot wait to find and seek more information about the world. It's really plentiful and endless, the amount of information, and really like there's a fantastic documentary about this guy who. If you look at this is obviously this is a conspiracy theory in itself, but if you YouTube was 9/11 an inside job, there is a really good, fascinating documentary of this guy who goes in introspect of what was happening with governments and what was happening and what is occurring, and he says there's a way to beat this the government in terms of what they do, but you just have to pile up and mount up the evidence and build up a case like an investigator. And I think he was an investigator for the CIA, and he said one of the problems with people is they just do not read. They do not read what any of these articles that get released by the government. Who reads them? Who's interested on them? And when you have the press who in some ways are controlled, that they're not going to release this very secretive information. Well, not secretive information. Information is just out there. It's on the internet right now, which is freely accessible, where you could see that the government are doing immoral crimes, which really have no direct humanitarian reason other than for the gain of the coin. And we are quite happy to sit back and watch our TVs and fly on the wall what's the word, where you reality TV shows, and really get engulfed into easy, simple entertainment, which may get like a little chorus of chuckling between ourselves, but we never really ask each other about our days, what we're doing, really struggle in terms of our life. We never sit down, switch the TV off, and eat our meals and talk about anything in terms of life, news, topics. Things just start to slowly narrow down, and we all become part of this singular narrative of what happened yesterday on TV. Was anyone else watching that? And that is our form of relation to each other. Or was anyone watching the sport yesterday? So Huxley does have a very important message. Now, I guess seeing that we have internet, there isn't quite the situation where we'd all go down to the cinema together and watch the same movie, propaganda movie of us winning the war. It's slightly different in terms of what we watch on TV. There is obviously a little bit of division which occurs between men and women, a little bit of division between the youth and the slightly more aged. So just to consider on that. But there are obviously the people that will delve onto the internet, look at create blogs, really look at information. But again, there's another thing. There's a labeling of those people, and they can be called conspiracy theorists as well. And it's a very awkward word. As soon as you use the word conspiracy theorist, you just sound like a mad hat-chick job. It's almost like you are a little bit insane if you start saying, yeah, I'm a conspiracy theorist. People will sort of consider everything that you say is complete conspiracy. So, and they just say, okay, right, you believe in lizard people and all this kind of stuff, and you'd like to put tinfoil on your head. So there is a very gigantic thing in place which we won't really delve into and we won't read about. And this information is extremely accessible. But there is just so much out there which distracts us that we're not really even, that it doesn't even become relevant to us. So let's go back. We have with Orwell, he was concerned with people, certain people in certain places, depriving us of information. So important, valid information, which was going to affect our lives in incredible amounts of ways, whether there would be a massive financial crisis going to happen around the corner. Who knows whether the government knew about these things that were going to occur. Economic advisors possibly could have advised this. Maybe the military was aware. Maybe the military and the police force are fully aware that there potentially could be mass riotings on the streets and are arming themselves against a revolt against governments. Who knows exactly what information is out there that could be deprived? But I guess that is probably quite accessible information that may not be provided to us when we do have the opposing sides of the government and the people. It's very interesting in those terms, and I guess there is a definite amount of deprived information which do occur. There is obviously a certain level of propaganda which gets applied and filters out the airwaves. If you can think of where China will say that short sellers are not patriotic of their country and their stock market. So there is certain elements which do occur where you do have a deprivement of information, where you get whistleblowers and leakers or traitors. There are all different terminologies. I'm talking about how you would use the use of words, but there is all different parts where the state will deprive us of information. Obviously, I have highlighted a point where we have one individual, one brave, I guess he's brave to carry out his act, let's just put it in that terms, to say to us that the government is watching us all over the place, and this information is happening all of the time. Hello, NSA. we really just look at these circumstances, and we're like shocked and awed about this information. However, the news and the press will turn it around into this person's a traitor. This person's not looking after the country. We're putting people that are spies in different countries at great risks, who have gone to great lengths to put them there at the taxpayers' expense. There is obviously a few things with information which gets turned around and suppressed as well at the same point. So important, vital information about what's going to happen is incredibly important. Potentially, you could make counter arguments that certain pieces of information would be fairly. Sometimes information is better to be suppressed than to given out. So let's just say that if the government turned around today and said there's no more money and all your bank accounts is going to be frozen, and you basically would create a tsunami of economic deprivation in a matter of seconds. However, you could say in some ways that they kicked down the can down the road for that to happen anyway, but it's But you could say like maybe a massive meteorite was going to smash into Earth, killing everybody. Maybe it would just be better off that the government didn't mention anything and just try to deal with it their own ways, rather than to send everybody into a state of chaos. But you could say in the other way, maybe people would just say, okay, well, let's just have one good party and send ourselves off in that way. So, depriving of information doesn't necessarily quite work out in great ways. Now, Huxley was more of the fear that they would give us too much. That it would reduce our. Huxley was in fear that we would be given too much in terms of information, self-gratification, entertainment, that we would turn into very passive people and be very egotistical. So there is definite linkages there. Now, I guess when I'm looking at and reviewing both of these books, there's a certain level of where I'm talking about the self and I'm talking about the government and the state. And I guess both of these are fairly relevant in our days. And both of these guys have sort of got a good message that covers us from both perspectives. I would say, if anything, the most important one would be about ourselves and what we can do, because that's the one thing that's manageable, and where there's more of us which are really curious and acquiring more information about the state and the nature that we live in, it really does improve the world. So Huxley is just mentioning here that his message in general is that we're sitting around and we got too many toys to play around with. We've got so many internets, and we've got computer games. We've got even if you can consider in the terms of conspiracy theory, you've got too many channels of conspiracy theorists as well. You could literally just go onto a ridiculous amount of conspiracy theories, some which would be fairly evidence-based and quite correct, and then you could go down the route of complete mysticism, where we've got some ridiculous like alien world which is trying to be in control of us and things like that. So there's an endless tide of information which bamboozles us in the terms of how we're living in our state, and it is potentially the nature of our downfall. So if China just said, right, let's lift up all of the information and let its people just read it right now, China would be just like, well, how the hell do we get through all of this stuff? And then they would potentially, I mean, you could say that the curious ones would start to say, right, we need to use this based upon reason and evidence and get through the data and see what is correct and true. But other people would just be like, I can't read through all of this, and maybe even I'll just let the information take me wherever I want it to take me to. So if people are attuned to being certain ways inclined, they will just go into this nature of what they want to see. So if you really want to see something and you want to say that the governments are really suppressing us and they've got this timeline of killing humanity and all this kind of like incredibly disastrous stuff, you're going to find all of that shit in a matter of seconds on the internet. Whereas if you really want to try and do some research and look at things and be analytical about the evidence and get things which are grounded and verified, that takes time and effort, and people are like, well, I don't have this time to do all of this stuff. So we do turn into our own egotistical states, and we get really pacified by the ridiculous nature of all this information. So go ahead, China, just release the hounds, let all the information flood out there. really, you may get a few. You create a few good men, but then and ladies, but you may just still get people that just really don't care. So Orwell, fear the truth would be concealed from us. So we'll be just sitting there reading the news that the troops are abroad fighting for our freedoms and keeping the democracy alive, to stop these tyrannical forces from taking over the world and being the best country in the world. Whereas, obviously, if you're an American, I've seen this happen when I'm like a British person abroad, and I've seen an American being subjected to somebody being irrational and saying, "Oh, America's horrible. They're all the worst in the world." Obviously, this is just a person. He's not really anything to do with the whole of America's state, but you get a sense that obviously America do a lot of covert operations and wars. They take out certain leaders and then replace them with leaders which are more inclined to their political beliefs and potentially are going to be very accepting and willing of trade deals which can occur. So when if you could consider to a certain extent the logistical nature of and the supply lines of places like Afghanistan and the supply lines of Iraq, you've got Afghanistan, which potentially has heroin trade, and you have Iraq, which potentially has plenty of oil. Yeah, you do have these certain amounts of resources which are quite freely available. There is a lot of theories and backing that the war on drugs and the nature of the governments being in control of illegal and illicit drugs, there's certain levels of connections which happen there as well. So there is information that potentially is concealed of us. Please just do the evidence and research yourself. Don't just take somebody's word for it. But yeah, it's very interesting how it does happen. It does happen a lot, and I guess a lot in a way you speak to anybody that's got half a grain of sense. Even, like I've spoken to plenty of Americans. And Americans, like every single person that I speak to, if I ever mention anything of this stuff, really just instantly understand what I'm talking about straight away. More so than people that I would say from Britain or Australia usually. Like just getting a sample audience, they're like, "Yep, I know about it. This does happen," and they're fully aware of what happens in the nature of their state. I guess they've got a history of oppression of the British and how they took over and they try to create a low-tax state, so that they're fully aware of the freedom element. So when their government starts becoming a little bit warmongery and they've got there's a lot of financial interests which are occurring, I think the American citizens do have a little inkling of what's going on. I do sort of worry a little bit now that we might be coming into an era of, I mean, Trump may not get into power, but there's a lot of this era where we're going, okay, we've got this very lefty, wishy-washy president of Barack Obama who just like puts a few little liberal things into society like gay marriage and people like liberation and things like that, but really what we need a big ballsy president now who can really sort shit out and be in charge of the money and do all the war shit for us and things like that. We basically maybe want a little bit more of a Bushy kind of character again, and Trump potentially does offer that, and it's kind of scary how the pendulum will swing from side to side, and we really don't get that sort of they don't really get that president that does these things that they really truly want to happen. Okay, so Mr. Huxley, obviously as well, said he would in his books and how he would relay it. So that Huxley feared the truth would be drowned in a sea of irrelevance. So, yeah, you've got endless information channels. I guess this is getting a bit repetitive in terms of where I'm going with this, but with the media, you have so much endless information which is going through ultimate channels that things just become irrelevant. You cannot decipher and determine which is true and what is false. And this is where I think it's very important, where people start to go and link the dots and go, maybe we need to start going down this philosophy route, because as we are just surrounded in an endless sea of infinite information, we've got too much of it, and we need to start working out what is true and what is false. And this is where the philosopher and the philosophies come into power and come into relevance and really help and guide you into what is happening in this world. So it's basically you are now getting your map or your GPS, and now you can sort of guide yourself through this jungle of endless information. So yeah, start looking up at the original philosophers, how to work out what is true and false. You can obviously I'm trying to do a little bit of that. There's plenty of internet philosophy pages out there, so definitely try and sharpen your tools of deducting what is true and what is false. Swinging back to Orwell, he feared that we would be a captive culture. So we would all be captivated into one channel, one view, one perspective, and I guess you could say that that is happening. I guess I made a point earlier that we're getting a bit compartmentalized. Men are always stick around with men, talk about sports. Women will talk, sit around. Obviously, I know I'm creating stereotypes, and probably the people that are listening to me probably do not do this as much, if at all. But yeah, you could say that women talk about celebrity and gossip, and don't necessarily talk about their feelings and talk about what is happening in the world. There is a certain level of a narrative which is being pumped out by the press, a singular narrative of how people are being politically correct in the way and the terms that we use and describe things. We follow the certain narrative. There's a certain model of what is occurring in this world, and there is certain levels of counterbalances to everything that we say. So if I say something that's too out of tune, there will be an instant. It's almost like it's a culturally embedded thing where if I would say something out of turn, people would snap back at me and give me something in return. So let's say if I said, I think sport is crap, let's just think off the top of your head that somebody will say, well, what are you going to do in your life? What's interesting? You might just get something, one of those blanket questions, which obviously lends you to opening and saying either this massive long spiel, which you look instantly insane for, or you could say, maybe you could do a one-liner, life. Maybe that would work. But yeah, there's counter arguments to everything. If I start saying, well, 9/11 was an inside job, obviously that's going to give me the instant rebuttal of you're a conspiracy theorist. If I mention celebrity gossip is a load of crap, I actually, when I do this one with women, A lot of them actually will turn around and say, yeah, I understand it, but there is a little bit of a thing going on here in terms of where you get a celebrity and then they get built up so high that they tumble again. And then I would say maybe the moral aspects of this is quite a little bit dodgy. But I guess I go into a bit more of a moral philosophy conversation when I talk about the celebrity culture than if I talk to the man about the sporting culture, I guess, which is yeah, good on women. But yeah, it's there are little rebuttals which occur, natural ones which I'm not really pointing to at the moment. Wherever somebody speaks out of turn, people are going to just whack you back and give you like this. You're not towing the line so well. And that's why I like to surround myself to certain people that will take an argument, take a perspective, and entertain it as much as they like. Once we surround ourselves with those kind of people, then we can definitely get a lot more of a view. If I surround myself with lots of conservative people, then I'm going to be very tied into my little sect of people. If I surround myself with a lot of Christian people, I might be trying to follow the way of God and being very virtuous, but at the same time, I could be very set in a state of dogma. I could be what's the word? Okay, I'm not. Let's not speak too early of people that are religious, but yeah, I guess there's a little bit less in terms of critical thinking, which is being applied. If I state that the creation of the world is due to this God that made everything happen in 7 days. So if I surround myself with a certain mainstream of people, then I will start to create a very warped sense of reality. And this channeling does happen, and I can just turn into my own little sect. I really do not like to be channeled into certain areas, certain arenas. I do like to. I'm more than happy to be in office environments with a lot more women and a lot more. I can sit on both sides of the fence. There's no issue there, and I can quite entertain any argument and in any conversation. Be it that I'll try and I won't really know what the sports results are or what the latest celebrity gossip is, but channeling does happen, and I would say that this is in a part of this quick and easy rebuttal which society all know about, and it's almost like it's coded into us that we can just whack it back straight at us. With Huxley, so he was more in the fear of that we become a more trivial nature, preoccupied with like our own sort of self-gratification, what the lottery numbers are, remember the nostalgia of certain toys in the past, really just getting like playing computer games, watching sport, being just really like sent off into our own and I obviously mentioned this a little bit with Orwell about us being compartmentalized. I sort of just hijacked his idea and then turned it into Huxley's idea. I guess Orwell wanted a real sort of channeling of the masses, and I guess that was really capable in the terms of when there was one media center and then you had the central control of all of this. But now there is it's like this complete decentralizing of all of the media centers, and we now can just really be taken away with the fairies of all our insignificant natures. And I've mentioned this with a lot of things, but there's endless amounts of cultures and subcultures which we can be taken away with and really not get a broad perspective of the world. And it is important to get a broad perspective of the world if you are challenged into, if I just decide to become a goth and go into my goth culture, I'll be very pale and wear a lot of black leather clothes, and listen to a lot of death metal songs. But in the whole grand scheme of things, even though I might be very disciplined in that art form or that way of life, it's really not a very versatile mind, and I'm sort of just shadowing myself from everything else that's happening in the world of colour. So it's very true, very relevant, and yeah, decompartmentalization of or compartmentalization of us is definitely happening, and the ones that can lasso all of these ideas together, put them into a big giant sculpture, and then start talking about all of these things. This is important stuff. This is relevant. This is how we can sort of dissect what's happening in the world. To take a few steps back and look at the entire picture, see what the creation of humanity has become. Not be taken away with the fairies of our nostalgic past and into our own little way of the future. We should be looking at every single angle, because humanity is is something that's happening, I know, on loads of scales. The people that can round up all of these ideas and theories and ways of life have the best opportunities in life. And obviously, if you're in the mindset of creating value for other people, then you do have the best advantage. Whereby, if you are in a certain fad, that fad may last a few years and then decline. And as you do get with certain assets like nostalgic items, maybe things will reach their peak when, say, if you had baseball cards and I'm not sure, I could be totally wrong here, but let's just, I'm just going to make a theory up here that baseball cards right now would be the most expensive baseball cards potentially. Obviously, there is a certain level of rarity which occurs in terms of the ones of the past, which get, as time goes on, gets rarer and rarer because people lose things. But in terms of like the nostalgic moments, I guess the children that are earning who are around in the 70s and 80s, who are starting to earn the most money right now, those items are starting to fetch the highest values. So you may see that baseball cards from those times and eras are really starting to gravitate upwards, and also we might see that they start to depreciate potentially to a certain extent when their earning potential does decline to a certain degree. I guess you would still have like the rarest and the most revered baseball cards that will stick around for a long time, but who really knows the sports stars of the early 19th century? Not many people, and I guess there's a certain relevance and irrelevance of what is happening in times. So, yeah, a little bit of a tangent there. I do apologise. Huxley... Sorry about this. So, let me just get around this corner. So, that Huxley did mention that civil liberties and rationalists who are ever on the alert to oppose tyranny failed to take action. Failed to take into account man's almost infinite appetite for distractions. So, let me just go over that. Sorry, I was just pausing, and I was just in a little bit of a state of a trance there. Maybe that's the suppression which is occurring in the radio waves through the airwaves. yeah, we can go through this thing. So, libertarians and rationalists are ever alert of and opposed to the theory, fail to take into account man's almost infinite appetite for distractions. So, yeah, so I guess we are really following down the same route. There is people out there which are infinitely distracted, and it is in our nature just to be opposed to anything that is taking away our civil liberties and is tyrannical and is dangerous to us. So we definitely do not like any of this kind of stuff. If the government turns around and says and didn't name in the US the Patriot Act as the Civil Liberties Removement Act, then people would obviously be like, what the hell is going on? Why are people taking away our civil liberties? I do not think this would be acceptable. So obviously there's a little bit of a nice blending with the words there. But when it comes to this little drip of oppression and removing our rights, potentially under certain political situations where to take a certain, like, say, for example, 9/11 was a great time for the governments to start using, to take away powers from the people in terms of their liberal freedoms. It can now decide to look into anybody's information. They can, they don't really require any warrant to look into anybody's records. Spy agencies can just go straight into that kind of stuff. Obviously, people thought to themselves that, oh, this is just really, we're really just looking for those Taliban members, and we're going to look out for those because they're obviously they're the dodgy ones. But the problem when civil liberties do get removed from us, we don't know when another government gets into power, and they might be looking around at everybody else. So one good example is there was a census that was put forward just before the Second World War in Holland, and people would say, yes, I am a Jewish person. And and this was just a survey of the government, just a general, nice, gentle survey. And then all of a sudden, Adolf Hitler comes into power and finds this information, quite relevant to or certain generals who have found this quite relevant to the state of their governance, and use that information to seek and dispose of the Jewish population. So, information even that could seem quite innocent can be turned against us. And when it comes to people looking at us, then there is a lot of information that is being applied. And so we don't really quite understand what potentially could be used against us if we have this massive this ability where people can watch us from every single angle. We could have people looking from above. We can have people looking on our virtual sphere. So there is definitely a major concern when it comes to the governments who pass certain laws, and we get massively distracted while these laws gets passed. And the distraction can occur just by the general politics and the mood of the nation, but also where there's just so much information that's coming out. One of the famous tactics is when there's bad news, you drop out a few. A government does drop out a lot of the other bad news at the same time, so you're really distracted by this other fundamental news, but not looking at all the other stuff. So when you do have a terrorist attack, I would really focus on the news that day and definitely look at the back pages, because the government and anybody else, any other agency, will release as much bad news as possible, because people are going to be distracted, and the most amount of airwaves are going to be taken up to the bad news, which is the big distraction, whereas the other news about the economic data, or where certain civil liberties are being removed from us, that's all getting passed and the bills are getting agreed on when we're not really looking. And but then also it just could happen in a very Huxley manner, where we're just really distracted by everything. We don't read our books, we don't look at the news that much, or we don't look at alternative media, and we try and connect the dots between the two of those. And then we think it's just too much. We don't bother reading, and there's too many distractions in this world, so that it doesn't happen. So, a big warning there for you. In terms of 1984, people are controlled by inflicting pain. So that's a really interesting perspective in terms of Orwell's vision, that we can be controlled by the ability of the government to imprison us, to put us under pain, to switch a switch, and we're under pain, and that is obviously a fairly good way of oppressing man. However, it doesn't really release the full potential of and the nature of man. But in Huxley's world, which I think is definitely more of a state that we're looking at right now, and in Brave New World, people are controlled by inflicting immense amounts of pleasure, and the greatest sense for man is, like, if you think of the amount of ideas and things which could have been out there where man could have been working and deciding on things, there's a suppression of the nature of man, and we've got full access to pornography. I'm not saying that the governments are releasing out a load of pornography to us. It is pretty much a problem of our own psyche and our own self-discipline, that all this pornography just gets released, and we've just and obviously adolescents, youth just cannot control themselves, and man cannot control themselves, to the instant gratification nature of this. We've got too many sweets, we've got too many chocolates, we've got too much instant TV, we've got too many channels, we've got too many computer games. There's too many toys to buy out there now. There is just so many pleasurable items that we are in an immense world of control by our own instant gratification. And if we just really tie back and really learn any kind of discipline, if you just manage to discipline your body, for one, is an incredible thing of nature, where you can master your body and limit the amount of fats and sugars that it takes in, and increase the muscular definition of your body, just so it looks aesthetically more pleasing. That's an incredible will and power that you can control, which can improve your health and sustain a longer life, and enable you to even learn better as well, and improve your psyche. It's an amazing thing when you can suppress the will just to laze around, and the will just to eat bad foods or high energy foods. So Huxley, I think, that definitely does nail it. There is where we go, lean back to Brave New World. I don't think there is really a incredible amount of pain in this world that we sort of, particularly in the Western world. Now, I think it may be in countries that we just are seeing the raw end of the Western world, like the bombings and a lot of things like that. They are seeing the raw deal of the fear of the Western world and the nature of it, and how it's looking for the money and nothing else but the money, and the money's getting flooded, and there is a lot of fear there. I guess there's fear in sense of our economic nature, how we're fearful of economies, and how that can lead us to our own oppression, which is very true. I think I definitely need to indicate to that extent, when people are economically put into a route, they're just going to go to the government and say, we are fearful of the nature of the world that we live in. Please help us. What can you do for us? You must save us from this pain and anguish. Whereas, and then the government leaps to saying, I've got a great idea. We can create this humongous central bank that controls the world. And then on the other side, as I keep on mentioning, there is probably like the pre-Walker or the precursor to us getting there is this world of infinite pleasure that we don't even really like any kind of pain. We, if I get knocked over by a bus, somebody's going to quickly run over to me in an ambulance and give me an injection of diamorphine, and I won't feel no more pain. So we live in a world of suppressed pain, and we don't. I mentioned in a previous podcast how pain does shape our certain reality. It does keep us away from things that are dangerous. So a world without pain is incredibly important. If you could think ourselves of where we're living in this world of instant gratification, no boredom, because we're just always pleasing ourselves, there is a definite concern in terms of why we're continuously stuck in this state of nature that nothing really happens, and there's I always say that if you get bored, then the mind can travel much further than the way that you could be when you're just suppressed by watching this TV channel. When you're stuck in a room and you're thinking about things and you're thinking about the nature of your reality and your world, that's where it really you can start to go on 1,000 different routes, and in some ways it can benefit your life incredibly. But where you're sitting in and you're playing computer games, or you're looking to the next instantly gratifying thing, a fair little warning here as well, in terms of conspiracy theory as well, is that you can be addicted to that sort of one of the words can be called doom porn. There is addictive natures to everything that you can look into, and you've got to be very wary of the nature of how things can be changing our perception of pleasure. Another one as well is obviously just to round things up, and just to summarize the whole nature of the views of the two men, is to say that Orwell feared that what we hate will ruin us. So things like the government oppression, the guns, the wars, the channeling of the minds would eventually come to our ruin. And then on the other side would have Huxley would say that it would fear that what we love would ruin us. So the chocolate bars, the obesity, the diabetes, the never-ending inability to get anything done in your lives, and being continuously suppressed by the instant gratification nature of the virtual world, not the state of the real world. I definitely say that if you could really read any book first, I would always say that it would have to be probably Brave New World over 1984. The one thing that we do have infinite control over is ourselves. We have the ultimate power over and control over ourselves. And if enough of us have control over ourselves, then that potentially does have the answer to solving the problem of our own suppression in a government and status ways. Whereas if we're looking at the government and seeing all this oppression and things like that, it's not really it's not a very valid and useful way of improving the nature of this world. We can obviously object and use a good sense of arguing and stand up to the government in terms of words, but in a peaceful nature. But if we try and combat against the state of the government in terms of arms, you're going to lose. They've got all the arms, they've got all the military, all the police force. There's no way of ever beating that, but the power of words and the powers of reason, power of philosophy, has the ability to break down borders and to really meet people to their senses and deliver us from our own ruin. So, plenty to think over there. I have been the main reason why I did go through this is that I did see something on a site called Amusing Ourselves to Death, and it was this really good comic illustory between Huxley and Orwell, and I was sort of reviewing that in its sense because that gave me the best cue cards to work from. But I really enjoyed that, and yeah, look it up for yourselves. Definitely keep the thoughts experiments going. I think there is a lot to be said about these two great men, and we really can learn a lot from these guys. I do get a little bit scary about these intellectuals that get a little bit taken away with themselves and want to start this world of eugenics. But I would say a good eugenics, which we can just apply to ourselves, is selecting the right mate who can give us a great child. And when I say great child, I'm not talking about like the most healthiest one, but the most healthiest minded mates who can create us the best people for the future, so that our world that we deliver to our children is a better place than the world in which we are currently living in. I always want to improve things rather than make things worse. So thank you very much for your time. If you have any fantastic ideas to add to the conversation, I would most welcome it. Thank you for your time. Apologies for the pauses. It was getting a little bit tricky just to read some of the notes. Thank you very much for your time, and we will be back together very soon.